There are approximately 138,000 words in the Greek New Testament. So, 138,000 words in the New Testament. What Bart likes to say is there are more variants in the manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. That's a big understatement. We have about 500,000 textual variants. Just the Greek manuscripts we're talking about, not other languages. Just the manuscripts alone, we have far more variants than we do have words in the original.
Doubts over whether or not the New Testament documents are really what was originally said are pretty common, made even more common by a book called Misquoting Jesus by a guy named Bart Ehrman. Now, Ehrman is compelling, he's smart, he's well informed, and those qualities go a long way towards convincing people. But you need to know about a scholar named Dr. Daniel Wallace. He's also very bright, he's very well informed, and he makes some very compelling challenges to Ehrman's conclusions. Welcome to One Life Network, everyone. My name is Brett, and I've been a pastor a really, really long time. And at One Life, we're passionate about exploring cultural conversations from a Christ-centered worldview with people who believe and those who don't believe. And if that sounds like something you'd like to be a part of, join our community. You can hit like and subscribe, and we'd love to have you. Well, lately, I've had more opportunity to interact with people who do struggle with and doubt the message of the Christian faith. And I'm appreciating more than ever that the Bible itself is a barrier for various reasons for people. So, and I get it, but I can also say this, the brand of doubt brought on by Bart Ehrman, like wondering, do we really have the original message, should not be a source of struggle. Now, in this talk, Dr. Wallace helps us with that issue a whole lot. He's a senior research professor at Dallas Theological Seminary. He runs in the same circles as Bart Ehrman anyway. And wait until he tells you what his master's and his PhD subjects were. That tells you a whole lot. Now, surprisingly, he's going to agree with Bart Ehrman, but add a really, really important bit of information that'll set you free. I'll give some other observations at the end. Let's check it out.
Start with question number one then. How many variants do we have? Well, there's one way to measure this that Bart has been fond of saying, and this is one of the times that he actually understates the situation. Words in the New Testament. There are approximately 138,000 words in the Greek New Testament. Or if you were Brother Andrew, he would say there are 138,162 words in the Greek New Testament because that's what shows up in our standard text today. So 138,000 words in the New Testament. What Bart likes to say is there are more variants in the manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. That's a big understatement. The latest figures are that we have about 500,000 textual variants in the manuscripts. Just the Greek manuscripts we're talking about, not other languages. The New Testament was translated into several different languages. We have quotations by it by people known as church fathers, patristic quotations. Just the manuscripts alone, we have far more variants than we do have words in the original. If this was the only piece of data we have, those of you who are not Christians would be rejoicing. Those of you who are Christians would be slitting your wrists. We have some more information, though, to tell you about. And the big thing I think that is crucial here to get is that the reason we have a lot of textual variants is because we have a lot of manuscripts. If we had one manuscript of the New Testament, it wouldn't disagree with itself. There would be no variants. But does that tell you what the original says? No. It's just the one manuscript that we'd have to deal with.
That is a very, very important thing to point out. If we only had one manuscript, we wouldn't have variants, but we have so many because we have so many manuscripts. But the nature of the variants is the critical thing. Watch this.
What kinds of textual variations are there? And I'll be much faster about the rest of these. But I wanted to talk to you about the variants in the manuscripts. It's such important evidence to think about. Well, I could break this down into several different categories, but I can simplify it this way. Over 99% make virtually no difference at all. For example, there are spelling differences in the manuscripts that really affect nothing. You guys did not laugh at that. Where are you from? John, or the author of the fourth gospel, the Gospel of John, was a very creative speller. He spelled the same exact word 3 different ways within the space of 8 verses. I don't know how he could have pulled that off, but my brother was a creative speller, is a creative speller. He one time wrote a check out to me and misspelled his own name. I wonder if that was intentional, because it's kind of hard to cash. But anyway, These don't really affect anything. They can't even be translated. There are so many different kinds of things that don't get translated, difference in word order, spelling differences, other things. And so I have a question for you Greek geeks. How many ways are there to say John loves Mary in ancient Greek? Well, let me give you some issues. Now, if you don't know Greek, you still need to write the answers down because this will show up on the exam tomorrow. There's word order differences. Greek can put it in any order at once. John loves Mary, Mary loves John, loves Mary, John. Doesn't matter because Greek is a highly inflected language. You tell what the subject is by the end. You tell what the direct object is by the ending. And the Greek definite article, the word the, occurs with proper names. We don't know exactly why. I wrote my master's thesis on when the article does not appear in Greek. I spent over 1,200 hours writing that thesis. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on when it does appear in Greek. These two works could cure the most hopeless insomniac.
Troy, did you catch that? That's what I mean. He did his master's and then his PhD on these Greek articles. There are people like that out there. So at the very, very least, he really does know what he's talking about, and he's spent an inordinate amount of time on this kind of stuff.
We have the article in the Greek New Testament is far more common than any other word. 1 out of 7 words is the in Greek. And we still don't know why it's used with proper names. Although there have been lots of theories, nothing has compelled scholars to believe it one way or another. So you can say, the John loves Mary, the John loves the Mary, John loves the Mary, and it's always translated, John loves Mary. Then there's differences in spelling. For example, the name in John, for John in Greek either has 2 N's in the middle or 1 N. Every time we see it, there are some manuscripts with 2 N's, some with 1. Ioannes or Ioannes. Pronounced the same, spelled differently. So how many ways are there to say John loves Mary in Greek? There's 8 different ways. I had to obviously put this in Greek. If I put this in English, it would say John loves Mary each time, and so you wouldn't get a sense. So you need to, I'll give you a little time to write these down so you have the data. It's not just this number of ways. There's another 8 ways to say John loves Mary. Same word for loves each time, and it's always translated John loves Mary. It's not Mary is loved by John. Every verse, every sentence, is translated John loves Mary. And some more ways, and more. I can assure you these are all different. This took me 8 hours one day to come up with this. So I hope you appreciate this. Yeah, I'm anal like Brother Andrew, I know.
Aren't you glad there's people out there like that and they're not you?
96 ways to say John loves Mary in Greek without changing the basic meaning at all. But there's also conjunctions that are often untranslated that go along with sentences like this. And I just picked on a few of them, and so there's some more ways to say John loves Mary. Hold on a second. $384 ways to say John loves Mary in Greek without changing anything. Now, there's actually more ways, but after 8 hours, I felt that I proved my point. These are not all the ways to say John loves Mary in Greek. Other legitimate word orders swell the numbers to over 500, and a different verb for loves now mushrooms the numbers to nearly 1,200. Bart Ehrman said we could go on nearly forever talking about specific places in which the texts of the New Testament came to be changed, either accidentally or intentionally. The examples are not just in the hundreds, but in the thousands. He's absolutely right. And if we talked about these, that would cure the most hopeless insomniac. If we can say John loves Mary over 1,000 times in Greek without substantially changing the meaning, the number of textual variants for the New Testament is meaningless. It's a meaningless number. What counts is the nature of these variants. What really is affected? And the smallest category of variants are those that are both meaningful and viable. That is, they change the meaning to some degree, and they have a good chance of being authentic. That's what we mean by viable. Less than 1/5 of 1% of all textual variants fit this group. Here's a way to represent it. The big blue box is the number of textual variants we have. And when you hear about 500,000 textual variants, this is the way that most people think about it. But let's talk about the ones that are actually significant. It's that little yellow box in the corner.
And that's the money moment right there, just to have that image in your head. When you hear about those kind of discussions in pop culture, read Bart Ehrman or whatever, that is the critical thing to remember. And let's just say it can be a little misleading to say it's anything beyond that.
That's what we're really talking about. I am a member of the Society of Biblical Literature. Bart Ehrman is also a member of that, and he has given several lectures there. I've given lectures there as well. And when we have this group of textual scholars to get together and talk about variants, I can assure you we've never talked about this large blue box. We'd get kicked out of the society for doing something so boring. What we're focusing on are those that do change the meaning of the text to some degree. So let me give you a couple of illustrations. Here's one of my favorites, Mark chapter 9, verse 29. Jesus' disciples were trying to kick out some demons, cast out some demons, and they were unsuccessful. So he said to them, this kind can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. Or did he just say, by prayer, period? This is the only place in the entire New Testament where and fasting may be part of the original text in the sense of it's a command or a suggestion that you need to fast to do something. So maybe if some of you are involved in exorcisms, you might want to hedge your bet and pray and fast, or you might just pray. Most scholars think the original text ends with prayer, but maybe it also is fasting. And of course, just looking at me, you can tell that I agree with the shorter text, but let's not talk about that further. Question 3, what theological beliefs depend on textually suspect passages? Well, I go back to Dan Brown in his Da Vinci Code. And he has Sir Lee Teabing say to Sophie, my dear, until that moment in history, Jesus was viewed by his followers as a mortal prophet, a great and powerful man, but a man nonetheless, a mortal. That time in history was when the Council of Nicaea met in AD 325, according to Teabing and Dan Brown. Emperor Constantine was the one who convened it, and then he left and came back towards the end of it later in that summer. So what Dan Brown is saying is that Constantine invented the deity of Christ. We saw that when we already read from M.M. al-Azami. He believes something similar to that it was the Orthodox Church, the one that came out in the 4th century that finally won the battle against the others, that affirmed a view of the deity of Christ that Christians today would hold to. Remember when I told you an ounce of evidence is worth a pound of presupposition? Here's an ounce of evidence, P66, and that's the first leaf of P66. Did you see it? I hope you wrote it down. You can read along with me if you'd like. In John 1:1. This is a manuscript dated about AD 200, about 125 years older than the Council of Nicaea. So here's what it says. I'll read it real quickly for you. En arche en halagos, kai halagos en proston theon, kai theos en halagos. Or, you probably know it better as, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. What P66 says, 125 years before the Council of Nicaea, is what every single manuscript of John's Gospel, no matter the date or the language, says at this place. Jesus is unequivocally called God. The same could be said for the major passages that affirm his deity, his virgin birth, his sinlessness, his death on a cross, his bodily resurrection, and his second coming. And there are none of these places that deny these things. There are some where the textual variant is, it's not an affirmation, but it's also not a denial. You see the difference? That's a very important distinction to make. So we get to our fourth question. In other words, what theological issues are dependent on this? Nothing essential. Maybe whether you should fast when you're doing exorcisms, but not too many other things. Has the essence, our final question, has the essence of the Christian faith been corrupted by the scribes? Sir Frederick Kenyon, who was paleographer extraordinaire and the principal librarian at the British Museum for many, many years, said this about 80 years ago. The general result of all these discoveries, when a lot of these early papyrus discoveries were being made, and all this study is to strengthen the proof of the authenticity of the scriptures and our conviction that we have in our hands in substantial integrity the veritable Word of God. I think that's a great statement. In substantial integrity, we have in our hands the veritable Word of God. But it's not just a guy like Kenyon who says that. Listen to somebody whom you already know intimately because he was here last week, Bart Ehrman. In his book, Misquoting Jesus, in the paperback edition that came out after about 6 months after the hardback edition, they had an appendix. And on page 252, the editors of this book asked this question: why do you believe these core tenets of Christian orthodoxy to be in jeopardy based on the scribal errors you discovered in the biblical manuscripts? Notice they're not asking, do you believe these core tenets to be in jeopardy? They're asking, why do you believe? In other words, the way they read his book is the way hundreds of thousands of college students and others have read his book. Namely, that Bart Ehrman is saying that the core tenets of orthodoxy, of the Christian faith, are in jeopardy by these textual variants. He even sounded like he was saying that earlier. Here's his answer. Essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. Page 252, Misquoting Jesus of the paperback version. Essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. And so I conclude by simply saying, I agree. I couldn't have put it better myself. The New Testament text in all essentials and in the vast majority of particulars is absolutely certain.
Well, I think I want to nail down a few things. First of all, we need to remember it's very common in pop culture to kind of wave away the reliability of the New Testament by saying, it was like the game of telephone. We have another video on this where we go into this more in depth. Don't let that be your point of objection, because it's really an objection out of ignorance. You have really geeky type people who have looked at these things in the original manuscripts and can tell you that's the nature of the variations. The second thing is this, if I could text someone right now, I could text a friend and say, my favorite food is whatever spicy food. Well, I don't know about you, but I've often switched between the British spelling, Australian spelling, and U.S. spelling. You ever notice that in the word favorite, the British spelling adds a U, right? Well, if I go to British spelling, does that change the fact that he knows that I like spicy food? Well, of course not. That's the kind of variations that they're talking about when it comes to this. We spell things different ways. We deal with that kind of stuff now. And thirdly, I think the most important thing is his point about the major Christian doctrines are not affected. You're getting what Christianity has always said. And that's the stuff you need to think about. First of all, were we created by an infinite personal God? What do we do with our guilt? Did Jesus rise again from the dead? Is he who he claimed to be? Those are the issues you really need to grapple with and not get lost in the textual variants and things like that, that kind of biblical orthodoxy and all that kind of thing. I hope that helps. See you next time.